This story began like thousands of others. The young girl wanted a beautiful life and decided to seek her happiness in another country. But she contacted the wrong person, so her dreams were not destined to come true. 18-year-old Anastasia Solovyova lived in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. She studied at the conservatory and spoke good English. Anastasia's family was intelligent, educated, but not entirely wealthy. The girl dreamed of a better life. She was very attracted to America. Anastasia was looking for an opportunity to get into this country. Her mother also wanted a better future for her daughter, so she persuaded Anastasia to contact a marriage agency to find an American husband. Soon Anastasia met a man named Indle King. He was 36 years old. He presented himself as an independent, educated man with his own business. Indle looked older than his years. He was overweight, receding hairline, and generally looked untidy. Indle understood that he was no match for a beautiful young girl, so in correspondence he focused on finances. He claimed that he could make Anastasia happy and would love her like no other. Indle had long dreamed of children, and Anastasia wanted to obtain American citizenship. Therefore, even during correspondence on the internet, they entered into an agreement. After the marriage, Anastasia would give birth to an heir to Indle and in return receive a comfortable life and U.S. citizenship. A natural question arises: why did Indle look for a foreign wife and not marry an American on the same terms? He said American women weren't ambitious enough. He was attracted to Russian girls not only for their beauty, but also for their mentality. He wanted to marry an ambitious, but also submissive girl. But these qualities are practically incompatible. In April 1998, after 6 months of correspondence, Anastasia flew to Seattle to meet Indle. A month later, they got married. At first glance, it seemed that their marriage was perfect because it was mutually beneficial. And everything would be fine if both spouses respected the agreement. The married life of Indle and Anastasia King began. Anastasia quickly became involved in American life. She was not going to sit on her husband's neck, but wanted to study and achieve something in life. First of all, Anastasia entered the economics department of the University of Washington. She quickly made new friends because she easily got along with people and was very open, kind and friendly. Every day Anastasia felt more and more confident in America. She was hanging out with other people, but Indle wasn't happy about that. He became jealous of his wife because he felt he was losing control over her. Because of this, they often had quarrels. Anastasia was only 18 years old. Naturally, she wanted to walk, communicate with peers and develop. But Indle wanted the girl to devote all her time to him. One day, classmates decided to have a barbecue, called Anastasia, and said that she could take her husband with her. When Anastasia told Indle about this, he replied that they would not go anywhere. To her question why, he replied, "You are married, now you are not a child, but a married woman. You don't need anyone but me, be happy with me, stay at home, and I will take care of you." She didn't want to fight, so she had to agree. Studying was not Anastasia's only occupation. She got a job as an administrator in a restaurant for a few days a week. Indle was unpleasantly surprised. It would seem that he should be happy for his beloved that she, without education and experience in a foreign country, found a job so quickly. But the first thing he asked when he found out about it: "Who is the manager there, a man or a woman?" Anastasia answered, "A woman," and he calmed down a little. Obviously, Indle was very jealous of Anastasia. His insecurity was due to unsuccessful past relationships. Anastasia was not his first wife. Moreover, he also looked for all potential brides through foreign marriage agencies. Indle's first marriage was unsuccessful. His Russian wife lived with him for 3 years, received American citizenship, and then left him. In the divorce, she received $55,000 and in their relationship too, everything was not going smoothly and they parted on a bad note. Indle even got a ban on approaching his ex-wife. But of course he didn't say anything about this to his new chosen one. Indle wanted to make a good impression and create the perfect marriage. But he wanted his wife to be a submissive homebody, but Anastasia turned out to be not at all like that. She had her own goals, which she tried to realize with all her might. Outside home, Anastasia literally enjoyed life. She wanted to become an American, to get the experience that Americans have, their behavior and traditions. The restaurant was important to her because there she was completely immersed in American culture, she was among people. In addition, Anastasia didn't work for the sake of money, it was an excuse to sneak out of the home. But unfortunately, even at work, she could not hide from Indle. He often arrived before the end of the shift and waited outside the restaurant. Her colleagues at first thought that her father was coming for her and were surprised when Anastasia said that this was her husband. He was no match for her, he looked not at his 36 years old, but almost at 50. Next to a young and slender girl, he really looked more like her father. At work, Anastasia became friends with her colleague named Patty. Over time, the girl began to tell her friend about the strained relationship with her husband. Patty wondered why Indle kept dropping Anastasia in and out of work instead of letting her ride the bus with everyone else. From the outside, this situation looks like a manifestation of concern for his wife. And only those who knew what the couple actually had understood that Indle was simply trying to control every step of his wife. He was against Anastasia working. He needed a property wife to cook, clean, and unquestioningly obey him. But Anastasia behaved differently. A year has passed, but Anastasia has not fulfilled her part of the agreement. That is, she didn't give birth a child. This is where the problems started. She was not ready to have children, she was only 19 years old, and she wanted to get an education first and then find a good job so she could be financially independent. In the future, Anastasia wanted to stay in the United States. From the very beginning, they slept in separate bedrooms, but Indle was against Anastasia locking the door at night. She had to comply to avoid another conflict. Anastasia tried to spend as little time as possible at home. Only at the university and at work she feels free. One day, a guy came to dinner at the restaurant where Anastasia worked, who was also from Russia. His name was Sergei. He ran a successful trading company. Anastasia was pleased to meet a countryman and talk to him in her native language. Communication with the guy became for Anastasia a thread connecting her with her homeland. She was pleased to spend time with Sergei. Friends were happy for her. They believed that it was with such a person that she could become happy. He was funny, bright, and interesting. At home, the atmosphere grew tenser. Anastasia didn't give Indle what he expected: obedience, respect, and intimacy. The resistance gradually grew. The more she understood what opportunities America offered her and strove for independence, Indle's control became tougher. Anastasia could not easily leave Indle because then she would have to return to Kyrgyzstan. According to American law, she had to be married for 3 years to apply for citizenship, but only a year passed. In addition, Indle could file for divorce at any time, and then Anastasia would have been deported, and she was very afraid of this. Anastasia continued to communicate with a new friend, Sergei, and over time this grew into a romance. Indle naturally knew nothing, but because his wife rejected him, he had suspicions that she had someone. Anastasia was happy with Sergei. With him, she realized what a real relationship should be. When Anastasia wanted to meet him, she told her husband that she was hired as an interpreter. So several months passed. Anastasia understood that she was doing wrong, but she could not help her feelings. Indle, suspecting something was wrong, even followed his wife and rummaged through her things to find evidence of infidelity. He did the same with his first wife when he began to lose control over her. One day, quite by accident, Indle was driving past the car park and saw Anastasia, who at that moment, together with Sergei, was choosing a car. Indle went up to them and began to shout, asking who it was. Anastasia replied that this is her client from Russia, who hired her as a translator, and at the moment she is helping him with the purchase of a car. Sergei played along with her. He spoke in Russian. Indle was confused. Anastasia told him that they were in a hurry, she would explain everything when she got home. After this incident, Indle became even more obsessive. He expressed his dissatisfaction with his wife absolutely on any occasion. He suspected that she was cheating, but he had no proof. The anger and indignation of Indle can be understood because Anastasia was his legal wife, but at the same time she didn't behave properly. And besides, she was clearly hiding something from him. But in this family, not only Anastasia had secrets. From the moment they met, Indle lied about being rich. He said he owned a holding company and his parents were millionaires. While meeting Anastasia's parents, he positioned himself as a self-confident person, educated, who knows how to earn money and will make Anastasia's life better. In fact, at the time of his acquaintance, things were not going well. He was in despair. There was no money, the car was taken for debts, and later Indle was fired from his job and financial problems worsened even more. Indle believed that thanks to Anastasia, he would be able to solve all problems. When his sister Paige got married and had children, her parents gave her a house. Therefore, Indle thought that if he also had heirs, his parents would provide him with material support. Very strange position for an adult man. Indle could get a job and settle his affairs, but he decided to take an easier path. According to some reports, when Anastasia flew to the United States, Indle lived with parents who supported him. The holding company that Indle spoke of was actually owned by his father. After the marriage, Indle's parents gave the newlyweds a house in Seattle and helped pay the bills. But this was not enough for Indle. He needed a child so that his parents would help him even more. But the problem was that Anastasia didn't let him near her. Most likely, she felt that she would not stay with him for long. Once Indle directly expressed his displeasure to Anastasia. He said that she was not keeping her promise to have children. Anastasia replied that she had changed her mind. First of all, she wants to finish her studies, and then they will return to talking about children. But Indle yelled that if she didn't give birth to a child as soon as possible, she would go back to her parents. In the summer of 1999, Indle became even more obsessive. He lost control of himself. He lost his job a long time ago. His savings were running out and he had no source of income. Also, the situation was aggravated by his jealousy and constant suspicions of his wife's infidelity. In order not to completely lose control over her, Indle ordered Anastasia to transfer all of her salary to their joint bank account. But only Indle had access to the account. There was not enough money and Indle began to rent a room in his house. One of the tenants lived with them longer than the others. It was 21-year-old Daniel Larson. For Indle, he was the perfect lodger. Daniel did whatever job Indle gave him. Almost all household duties were thrown on the guy. The house was supposed to be sparkling clean, and if something was wrong, Indle stood over Daniel's soul until he redid everything. Indle and Daniel's relationship was reminiscent of an unhealthy father-son relationship. Indle felt his power and superiority over the guy and enjoyed it. Daniel had a criminal past. Indle knew about it, but it didn't bother him at all. Anastasia and their family acquaintances didn't immediately find out for what crime Daniel was serving a sentence. It turned out that he had been convicted of sexually assaulting underage girls. Daniel said that he was in a relationship with a girl younger than him. Her parents didn't like him. He was arrested for having sex with an underage person. But as it turned out later, he lied. It wasn't just about one girl. He committed several similar crimes. Indle didn't care about Daniel's past. There was a close bond between them. But Anastasia began to be wary of Daniel when she found out about his past. She didn't like him. She didn't want to see him in her house, but Indle was not going to kick the lodger out. Besides, Daniel himself wanted to stay. Daniel saw Anastasia as a threat and was rude to her. In addition, he turned Indle against his wife. He said that Anastasia was behaving inappropriately. She does not respect her husband, considers him worthless, and behaves as if she were the mistress of the house. Daniel convinced Indle that Anastasia is evil itself and not at all who she claims to be. Over time, Anastasia became an outcast in her home. Indle became increasingly angry towards Anastasia. Always found a reason to yell at her. He even made a list of complaints about her, in which he listed everything that did not suit him. In turn, Anastasia kept a diary in which she wrote down all her fears. She hid it in her locker at work. Anastasia didn't know how to get away from Indle. She needed to hold out for another year. Therefore, she tried her best to save the marriage. One evening, Indle left the house and left the computer on. Anastasia went to his desk to pick up the dirty dishes and turned her attention to the monitor. There she saw the open pages of a marriage agency. Indle was looking for a new wife. Scrolling through the correspondence, Anastasia managed to read exactly what Indle wrote to potential brides. He said his wife left him, that she deceived him and left, and now he is lonely and unhappy. Anastasia realized that Indle wanted to get rid of her and even shared this with her friend Patty. She asked, "Why is he doing this?" Anastasia replied, "Because he needs children, and I am not yet ready for the birth of a child." Unable to endure the current situation, Anastasia decided to fly home. She told Indle that she just wanted to visit her parents so that he would not suspect anything and let her go. There, away from him, she wanted to think and decide what to do next. Anastasia hardly managed to persuade her husband to fly away to Bishkek. But Indle could not let his wife out of his sight for long. He decided that he wanted to make peace, so he flew to Kyrgyzstan. Anastasia was shocked by such an act. In front of her relatives, Indle pretended that they were insanely in love and had an impeccable relationship. He did not leave Anastasia for a minute, so she did not even have the opportunity to discuss anything with her parents. In the end, Anastasia decided to return with her husband to the United States and let the situation take its course. Before leaving, she warned her work partner that she would return on Tuesday and will come to work at 2 p.m. She said she would call when she got there. On September 22, 1999, Anastasia and Indle arrived at the Bishkek airport. The couple had to transfer to another plane in Moscow and land in Seattle after 15 hours. Anastasia was supposed to call her parents as soon as she got home, but this never happened. A colleague at work also did not receive the promised call. Anastasia didn't show up for work, and her friends began to suspect that something had happened to her. Several days passed, but there was no news from Anastasia. Her friends and parents called her home, but no one answered the calls. Someone picked up the phone and immediately hung up. One day, Indle finally answered the phone. He shouted like a madman, "Moscow, Moscow," and hung up. Concerned friends and relatives of Anastasia contacted the police and reported her disappearance. The police went to Indle King's house. No one opened the door for them, although it was heard that there was someone in the house. The police went around the house and noticed a glass door that was slightly ajar. They went inside and began calling out loudly to Indle. A few minutes later, he came down to them. The police introduced themselves and said why they were here. They asked if he knew where Anastasia was. Indle replied that they should look for her in Moscow. Allegedly, after several happy days spent with his beloved in Kyrgyzstan, they were going to fly back, but at the airport they had a big fight. Anastasia said that she had an affair with a certain Sergei. she refused to fly, and Indle returned to the US alone. As proof that everything was fine in their relationship, Indle gave the police a video that was taken in Kyrgyzstan. They actually looked happy on it. It seemed very strange to everyone that Anastasia never got in touch with relatives and friends, missed the start of classes at the university, and did not go to work. Nobody believed that Anastasia remained in Russia. In early October, new information became known. The police found out that Anastasia was on board the plane that Indle flew. Consequently, she returned to Seattle. Later, the police received important data from the airport. Both spouses passed passport control with a difference of 1 minute. It became clear to everyone that Indle was lying. The police interrogated him again. During the interrogation, he behaved like a real actor. When police was shown evidence that Anastasia had returned to the United States, he feigned sincere surprise and said, "You mean she was on that plane?" Unfortunately, Indle had to be released because there was nothing against him. An active investigation into the disappearance of Anastasia began. Indle was immediately placed under constant surveillance. After the interrogation, the suspicion of the police about his involvement in the case only intensified. He became the prime suspect. Surveillance led the detectives to an unexpected place, the Snohomish County Jail, where Indle's former lodger Daniel Larson was awaiting trial. He was taken into custody for another sexual offense. He attacked a 16-year-old Russian girl in a shopping mall. According to the visit log, Indle visited Daniel on several occasions. This seemed suspicious to the police because Indle described their relationship as tenant and landlord. Then why did he regularly visit the guy in prison? The detectives visited Daniel to ask him about Indle and Anastasia. He insisted that he only knew about the quarrel that took place between the spouses at the airport. After that, Anastasia left Indle and he returned to the USA alone. But since the detectives knew that Anastasia had also flown to Seattle, they put pressure on Daniel and he said a little more than he wanted. The detectives realized that Daniel knew what happened to Anastasia. In order to find out more information, they changed tactics and decided to arouse his compassion. Daniel was abused from an early age, so he began to immerse himself in memories, and his confidence was shaken. Detectives said that Anastasia's parents suffered from ignorance and they deserved to know what happened to their daughter. Daniel gave up. He began to speak the truth. On the evening of September 22, 1999, Indle and Anastasia returned home. Indle called Daniel from the airport and told him to get ready. He was angry with his wife. Entering the house, Anastasia immediately went to her room. Indle asked her to come down, ostensibly to kiss her goodnight. She approached him, but instead of kissing him, he squeezed her in a bear hug, and Daniel came up behind and threw on a tie around her neck. Together they knocked Anastasia to the floor. She tried her best to break free. Indle pinned his wife to the floor with all his weight and told Daniel to tighten a tie around her neck. According to Daniel, Anastasia fought and struggled for another minute and then went limp. Indle said the body should be disposed of. They took off her jewelry, wrapped her in a carpet, put her in a car and drove her out of town. They burned their shoes and Anastasia's belongings. Her body was found 3 months after she disappeared. Daniel showed the place of burial. It was a landfill on an Indian reservation. To the right place had to wade through thick bushes. The police quickly found the body. After the discovery of Anastasia's body, the police charged Daniel and Indle with her murder. It was a premeditated crime, and the basis for this was the active search for a new bride. 4 months before the murder, Indle wrote to potential brides that his wife had left him. The investigation also found out that the video filmed in Kyrgyzstan was a trick. He tried to fabricate evidence that their marriage was happy, although he filed for divorce back in August. In March 2002, Daniel Larsson was sentenced to 20 years in prison for his part in Anastasia's murder. Indle King was sentenced to 29 years in prison. Anastasia's parents did their best to ensure that their daughter's death was not in vain. They worked closely with law enforcement in America. In 2006, the U.S. passed a law to regulate international marriage mediation designed to protect the 14,000 foreign brides who enter the USA each year. Now a man who is looking for a bride through an agency is required to report his convictions. If this law had been in place earlier, Anastasia would have known that Indle had a court order forbidding him to approach his ex-wife. The main motive for the murder was banal greed. In a divorce, Indle would have to pay his wife a large amount of money, just as with his first wife. To avoid this, he decided on a crime. But there is another version. Studying this case, I found interesting information. Some sources say that the motive for the murder was jealousy. Indle and Daniel were lovers, and Daniel was simply jealous of Indle for Anastasia. While in prison, Indle continues to insist on his innocence. He will be released in 2031. But Daniel Larsson has already been released in 2022.